In this process, we're going to be taking a look at how we can migrate from SELECTseries 2 using simply the styles within the template library, or also SELECTseries 3 or 4, where we're pointing to native for our feature definitions and not necessarily element templates. In other words, we're void of the element template environment. To show you where we're heading, this is OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, where we've opened up the Imperial training workspace. And just to show you basically the end product or where we're headed, we have, for example, if we concentrate on edge of pavement, we have a level called road edge of pavement. We have an element template under the folder structure linear pavement called road edge of pavement that points to this level that I'm showing here. We have then the feature symbology that's named road edge of pavement under the linear pavement road edge. That points to this linear template, which is shown here. And so the level is pointed to by the element template. The element template is pointed to by the feature symbologies. And then lastly, the feature definition points to both a linear and a profile feature symbology. And so, again, the feature definition goes to the feature symbology. The feature symbology goes to the element template here, and the element template goes to the level. And so what we're going to do is take a step backwards and learn how to migrate from a SELECTseries 2 environment without any element templates and make this work in OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition. This video will be focused on migrating GEOPAK users to the OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition. And to get started, I have installed an older version of Power GEOPAK, SELECTseries 2, and I want to first open the DGN library that has the levels. So select your levels file and open that DGN library. And what we want to do first is we want to export our levels to a comma-separated value file. And so we'll go to our level manager and export, and we'll give this a file name. I'm just going to abbreviate levels from ss2.csv, save that, and then we can close the level manager dialog. The next step in the process is in the GEOPAK road tools here, we want to go ahead and open Design and Computation Manager and make sure that you have the DDB file opened that contains your feature definitions for your current SELECTseries 2 template library. Then we're going to save this as a Microsoft Access database file. Now, you will need to have this DDB in a format that is not password protected. So if that's not the case, you'll need to contact the person in charge of maintaining that database. We're going to select to export this particular DDB file to a Microsoft database file. You just need to type the name in here. If you go to Browse, it's going to look to replace the file. We'll call this DDB from SS2 and select OK. So now at this point, we're actually done with our Power GEOPAK SELECTseries 2. So we can go ahead and close that application. Part of the process we're going to look at next is converting the DDB file that we have started with, and in my case the default styles.ddb. We're going to use an application that is written for this process. It's not delivered with the product, but we will make it downloadable through this video, and it's called the Element Template Utility, and it has an executable and 2 DLL files. There's no install process here. You simply unzip the file and run the executable by double clicking. With this executable, we're going to select a GEOPAK DDB exported to MDB file, and we need to pick that MDB file. And so in my example here, I called this DDB from SS2. So I'm going to open that. I'm going to do this by item name, which is basically going to take advantage of what the styles were called within the template library of SELECTseries 2. Usually that's handled by the item name. And so we're going to export that out to an Excel spreadsheet. And so we select Export, in the same folder here, I'm going to call this DDB from SS2 export.xlsx for Excel. Save that, and it's going to write that spreadsheet. And we open this file. This is going to essentially become our element template input file to create our element templates for our features. And so this is the first step. Now the way that this utility works is it takes everything from the DDB file and it writes it out to a particular row. And so as we can scroll down here, for example, we see that we have under our in conditions a lot of our grading. For example, here's one for a cut slope. Well, under this cut, we have the set feature, we have the line element, we have line direction label, line length label. These are the additional properties stored in the DDB that could be defined with this particular entry. But the ones that have the set feature is what we really care about in terms of the symbology of the line or the component. And so in Excel, what I want to do in order to match the same style that's used in the template library and the element template, I want to take the double underscore set feature out and just have those called, in this example, called cut. And so I'm going to select this column and I'm going to go to Find and Select under the Home tab and Replace. I'm going to find a double underscore set underscore feature, and I'm going to replace that with nothing. And so we'll do a replace all, OK, and close and save. And so now where you don't see that suffix, those are going to be isolated to the features that we're going to need for our templates to match up with our symbologies. And so you may have thousands of lines in this file, and just know that where you've taken that off, you now have the proper level, color, style, and weight that's going to dictate, for example, this, in this case, proposed shoulder. That is all we need to do in this particular file. And so we can save that, and then we can go ahead and close it. Now we actually need to run the Civil Element Template utility a second time, where we convert the Excel spreadsheet to a XML file that will be then imported to Power GEOPAK Select Series 4 to make our element templates. And so again, I'm going to double click on the application. I'm going to this time select the source as the Excel spreadsheet that we just modified, and we're going to pick that spreadsheet, the DDB from SS2 export, and so that's the file that we just modified. We're going to open that, and this time we're going to export that to an element template XML file. So we'll select export, and we'll call this, I'm going to give this a little bit better name at this point, and then we'll save. And now that XML file is written, and we are now ready to proceed to open up Power GEOPAK Select Series 4. Now before we can move directly to OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, we want to take advantage of how Select Series 4 can automatically create features from a mapped DDB file. And to begin to prepare for that, I'm going to go grab a blank seed file from OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition installs folder structure, and you'll see the path here. Go ahead and grab the 3D. I like to do our features in a 3D file, so when we assign materials later, we have access to the visualization tools. So I'm going to copy that seed file, and I'm going to put it over into our working folder structure. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. Just going to abbreviate OpenRoads Designer features.dgnlib. And we're not going to open it in OpenRoads Designer yet, but we are going to eventually. And so this is going to be our final file, if you will. So we want to now go ahead and open this file in Power GEOPAK Select Series 4. And when I go to open, I'm going to purposely enter in an untitled workspace so that we're not looking at levels or element templates from other workspace environments. I want to be clean here, and so we'll open up this new DGN library. And I want to make a note at this point because we're going to import levels, then we're going to import element templates, and then we're going to map our features. The important note here is if your levels are calling custom line styles, for example, if you go to your level manager in SELECTseries 2 and you start looking at these levels and you see that you have custom line styles there, those custom line styles need to be accessible during these next steps. And so if you're calling, for example, a custom line style resource file with the MicroStation variable ms underscore symbol resource, you need to go ahead and put that in this environment before you do this next step, because once we import the levels, it's going to be, again, looking for those custom line style names. If we can't find them, it's going to reassign those to a line style of 0. And so for the purposes of this video, I would assume that you already know about that, and so just make sure that you have access to those custom line styles. So now the first thing we want to do is we want to establish our levels, and to do that we simply select Levels, Import, where we made the levels from SS2 file, and so we'll open and select OK, and now we have all of our levels. Now that our levels are in place, we want to import our element templates. So element and then element templates, and then we're going to select File Import from XML, and we can browse then to our element templates for ORD XML file, open and select OK. And that will bring in our element templates from our DDB file that we exported to Excel. Just a couple of notes here. If I right click, select Sort Children, it'll alphabetize, and you would have to do that within each folder structure as well if you wanted to. But just to point out, we take a look at, for example, in our pavement proposed, and let's say that we look at our edge of pavement or concrete or base. We have this entry in here, and you see that it points to the right level, color, style, and weight because we have the levels in there. But the curve, the line direction label, the line element, the line length label, you may decide that you don't want to bring in all of those element templates. And so I could come into the element template dialog and delete them here. If you want to get rid of those, the best place to do that, I would suggest, would be in Excel before you import, and so then you can just get rid of all those entries. But what this does essentially is it establishes then our styles that we were using in SELECTseries 2 have now became element templates in SELECTseries 4. Now that the element templates are created, the next step in the process is going to be to generate our features in SELECTseries 4. At this point, we need to exit SELECTseries 4 for just a minute and make a copy of the default styles.ddb file that we started with and paste it into this folder that I'm showing here, assuming that you're doing Imperial. If you're doing metric, you would be under the metric folder structure for Power GEOPAK. But we have to load the default DDB file as we're coming into the product for this to map properly. And so initially the DDB file was called Civil Features Imperial.ddb. I'm going to rename that one for just a minute. We'll call that Original. And then the one that we copied over, I'm going to rename that one to the Civil Features Imperial.ddb. And now I'm going to reopen our DGN library in SELECTseries 4 Power GEOPAK. And just to verify, if I go to Design and Computation Manager, we should see then the DDB file that we saw in SELECTseries 2, and so that you'll see that those are all correct. And now we can come over into Project Explorer, and on our feature definitions, we simply right-click and select to link the active DDB by item name. The item name is what's being used in the template library in SELECTseries 2, not the description. And so we're going to link by item name and allow it then to create our feature definitions just like we saw in SELECTseries 2, the DDB file, which you can see here on the right. It's going to be an exact match. And just to show you, if I, for example, look at payment down here, I'll scroll down to our payment section, proposed, and we can look at, for example, payment inside edge. You'll see that it's there. And if we look at the properties, everything is pointing right now to native style, which is the way the program is written. But what we want to do then is convert that to where it points to the proper element templates. And that's something that we're going to be able to do in a bulk format using Excel in the OpenRoads Designer Connect edition. And so this is all we can do right now in SELECTseries 4 in this DGN library. And so we're ready to close out this DGN library in SELECTseries 4. And then the next steps will be to bring this over to OpenRoads Designer Connect edition. Now, before we actually open OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, there are two variables that you're going to need to set that should be considered administration-only variables. One is the ability to import and export feature definitions and symbologies, and the other is to upgrade DGN libraries, which is used for features and for civil cells. And so these are not something that we recommend giving out to your normal everyday users, but something more for administrative tasks. And so we want to temporarily set these two variables in your workspace before we go to OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition. At this point, I'd like to do a little bit of house cleaning, and so I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder here, and I'm just going to call this backup, just to kind of tidy things up, because some of this stuff we don't really need it anymore, and we want to get it out of the way. And so I'm going to take these particular files and move these out. Really what we're going to be focusing on is this ORD features.dgn library. And so we can take these and put those into our backup folder and start clean now with our ORD features.dgn lib. We do want to hang on to our levels and our element templates in this work in progress folder, if you will, because we're going to be converting this DGN library over and then exporting it out and then essentially creating it a second time where we have merged everything together. And so go ahead and keep the element templates in here and also the levels in here, and then proceed to open the ORD features.dgn lib with OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition. And pay attention on your workspace and work set. I'm going to go ahead and open no workspace, no work set. I'm going to browse to my file and select the DGN lib, which is here. Then if you set the variable, you're going to get a prompt to ask you if you want to upgrade, and so you definitely want to select yes here. So if we take a peek right now and just see where we're at in Project Explorer, if we look at, for example, our definitions to see what it gives us, notice that we don't have any mesh feature definitions, which is what we're going to need for components, and we're going to do that outside in Excel. But if it did give us our linear feature definitions, which again is a duplication of the DDB file. And so, for example, I go in here to payment, and I look at these particular entries. We have those linear feature definitions, and for example, if I look at like the inside or the outside edge of payment, it's pointing to both a linear and a profile feature symbology that were created for us. And so if I go down to our feature symbologies, again, we don't have a surface yet, but we will take care of that in a minute. We go down and expand in our linear, and again down to payment, proposed, and you'll see those same entries once again, not yet pointing to an element template, and those are things that we'll take care of in Excel. And so now what we're ready to do is we're ready to create an export of these symbologies and these definitions. Our element templates are good to go, and so we take a look again, just a reminder, they're where we want them to be. So we have, if we look at our payment, for example, those entries are there, right? And so now we want to go in and export. So we're going to right click on our symbologies and select export, and let's call this feature symbologies. The same thing then with feature definitions. We're going to export those. And at this point then we can go ahead and close OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, and we will continue then to work now in Excel. Before we can actually edit these two XML files that we created, our definitions and our symbologies, we want to convert those to Excel. And so our second utility here is called the Features Important Export utility. And I'm going to double click that executable, and we're going to select our symbologies XML file, which is here, and we're going to write that out to Excel. So we'll save that. Then we're going to run it again, and this time we're going to select our feature definitions, and we're going to write that out to Excel and save that. So now, just to kind of put everything in one basket, if you will, we have definitions, we have symbologies, and if I go back to my backup folder, export, because that's our element templates, I'm going to put that in here, and I'm going to group those together by extension. And so we have our symbologies, our definitions, and if you want to rename this to element templates now, that's fine, and just to make it a little bit easier to keep everything straight in your mind. So we have element templates, we have feature definitions, and we have feature symbologies. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the feature definitions file. So let's go ahead and open that. And in here we have several tabs that represent the different types of features. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my linear tab, and I'm going to take this DDB path out of all of my linear feature definitions. And so all I have to do is just select this column, and I'm going to go over here to replace under find and select, and you can go ahead and type in, and I want to do replace all, and that'll take that initial DDB name out of our feature definition path. And so we have our path, and then we have our name, and we'll save those changes. And then we're going to do the same thing over here in column G, where it's pointing to both the linear feature symbology, and then in column H is the profile feature symbology. So I'm going to use my control key and select both of those columns, and I'm going to do another find and replace here. And essentially just what we're looking for here is we want to get rid of this civil features imperial.ddb and one of the backslashes, and so we can just do replace all again, and it'll clean up those two and get the DDB path name out of there. And so we will save those changes. And one last thing that you might want to do, if you want to give it some type of a description, I typically can just grab the name and copy that and put it over here in the description field as a starting point. You're welcome to manually edit these. You can change the feature definition path if you want to. What you don't want to do, though, is if you start changing the feature definition name, whatever changes you make here, you would also have to make with your feature definitions inside your template library. Now that can be done bulk editing because the template library is simply an XML file, and so you could open it in a program like UltraEdit and do bulk search and replace if you want to. Just I would recommend be careful when you're doing that type of stuff and work on a backup copy and do a lot of testing. And so for this, we're just looking at straight migration, not necessarily optimization of our feature names and folders and that type of thing. And so at this particular point, we're done with modifying the feature definitions for the linear tab. The other one that's important here is we need to have our meshes defined. And so we have the linear, and then we have the mesh. In order to featureize our template components, we need to also generate mesh feature definitions in this particular spreadsheet. And so you'll see that we have the feature definition name, the path, the description, the name seed, the item type name, the surface feature symbology, and the volume option. Well, if we think about SELECTseries 2 and how they did things in that particular environment, this is the template library coming from SELECTseries 2. And if I look, for example, at this point center line, we already can find this linear feature definition because that's what got converted. There were no such things as surface styles or surface feature definitions in Select Series 2 of GEOPAK. And so in the DDB file, everything that was set up in our drafting standards was to be used for points and components. And so if I come over here to my components, it doesn't understand that there's a surface feature definition yet. There's no entries. But if in the template library in OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, I switch over to the active template mode and I look at the components, and I can come down here to the component feature definitions, and you'll see the names of those mesh feature definitions that we need to make. So you got things like aggregate and asphalt and base and cut, etc. Well, in our spreadsheet under linear, you have, for example, asphalt, base, concrete, aggregate. These are what we're using for the components, these names. And so in Select Series 2, there's no distinguishment between the linear features and the surface features, or what we identify with components. And so literally this name list is also the same name list it's looking for our mesh feature definitions. And so all I have to do is copy everything from the linear over to the mesh. Once I get things copied, then on the linear tab, I can take out the stuff that is used for components, and on the mesh tab, I can take things out that are used for linears. And so we have to do some manipulations, but let's go ahead and get started with making those changes. So if we begin to compare the columns, we have feature definition name, path, description, and name seed. Well, if we go to mesh, name, path, description, name seed, and item types we're not addressing right now, but the first four columns are going to be the same, and so I can come over to linear, literally just select these four columns, copy, go over here to mesh, and paste. So then we have two more to fill in. We have surface feature, symbology, and then we have to set the volume option. And so come back to our linear, and I'm just going to use the linear feature symbology column. And so we'll select those, we'll copy those, we'll come over to our mesh tab in our surface feature symbology, and we'll paste those. And so now we have those pointing to the appropriate surface feature symbology name. This is not an element template. This is a surface feature symbology which we have to create. Now, before we can move out of this column, at this point we're pointing to a surface feature symbology, not a linear, and so we need to change the name linear to surface, and we'll go back again to our find and select replace, and all I have to do now is search for linear. I'll put the backslash in there just to be safe. We'll call it surface, and then do a replace all. And so we'll make sure to save those changes, and that way when we go to point to the surface feature symbology, it'll be going to the right category now. And then lastly, our volume option, for example, design. And so I'm going to copy that down and paste that. Save these changes, and this will then put us in a situation where we are now ready to work on the symbologies side of the features. I've opened up the feature symbologies spreadsheet, and I've moved to the linear tab, and it did try to fill in a few of these element templates, but that's not what we are going to be using here. It basically looks at the folder name, it tries to find a match, and it thinks that the folder is a match. And so essentially these columns here need to be deleted. There's not going to be anything here of any value, and so you can just manually select those columns and hit the delete key and clean those out. At this point, you may have thousands of lines in here that the symbology name, the path is done, but the big problem here is we're not being able to point to the element template. Well, I have some good news. By doing this bulk editing in Excel, we can jump back over to our feature definitions spreadsheet. So we'll jump over here, and it doesn't matter which one, if I use the linear or if I use the mesh, but all I have to do is if I examine this, and I'm going to hold these side by side, this is my symbologies underneath and my definitions on top. Because I haven't inserted or deleted anything, everything exactly lines up. And so you can look at all of my entries, 2 through 39, 2 through 39. So the feature symbology name matches the feature definition name. And so that means if I take the linear feature symbology pointer, that folder structure, because all the folders are all the same, I can copy the linear feature symbology column from the definitions spreadsheet and switch over to the symbologies here. And in the symbologies, in the feature definition or the feature symbology default element template, we paste that, right? Well, the only thing that we have to do for these to be valid paths and element template names in MicroStation is take linear backslash out. And so if I come over to replace, I search for linear backslash and I replace that with nothing, and then do a replace all. This now matches the MicroStation element template path and element template name, and therefore our feature symbologies will be correct. And so I may have had 5,000 entries here. It doesn't matter. Because you haven't inserted or deleted or moved things around at this point in the spreadsheets, this is all going to line up. The other thing that we have to do over here in the feature symbology path is, if you remember, we took out the civil features imperial.ddb out of the folder structure in our feature definitions. And so just to show you, back here in our definitions, we had the feature definition name and the feature definition path, and in there we took out that DDB name. We need to do the same thing in our symbologies. And so we'll do a search and replace here, and we're going to search for the civil imperial and then we will do a replace all to get rid of that path. Save those changes. And so now we have the symbology name, the symbology path, we have the feature symbology default element template. So this is the MicroStation element template pointer, which is the same path as we're using for our pointer in our feature definitions. And the rest of this, the plan, the arc, the element, all that stuff you can re-export later to an XML and a spreadsheet and deal with it, but this is going to get your base up and running, which is 90% of the battle. Once this is done, what we did here, we just need to repeat for the profile and for the surface. And so if we go over to the profile, it's going to be the same process here. We'll clean those out. The removal here is going to be the same of the DDB. So we'll do the replace, correct that. So now we have the symbology path and we have the symbology name. Then we need the element template information. And again, all I have to do is come over here to linear, grab the MicroStation element template path and element template name, and we're going to put that over here, paste that. And so now we have all of those lined up. Then the next thing that we want to do is deal with our surfaces. So in our surface tab, these are not created at all. And so we don't have, for example, in our surfaces, we need a name, we need a path, and then the element templates and so on. And so what we're going to do is, again, we're just going to repeat everything to give us a good base starting point. And so I come over to my linear field, and we have our name, we have our path, and we have our default element template. I can copy all of those to my surfaces, and this is going to create our symbologies for our surfaces. And so we talked about how Some of these are for surfaces or template components, and some of these are for linear points. But right now we're going to keep them all together so that we can do this bulk pasting to get things initially set up. Now that we have our spreadsheets somewhat filled out for the symbologies and the definitions, now we need to rewrite the XML files. And so we're going to go back to the import and export utility and run that application again. And we're going to pick the XML file that we want to update. So let's start with the symbologies. And we're going to merge the data in this time from Excel. Instead of making the Excel file, we're going to let the Excel file be the master. So here's our symbologies. And that updated the XML. Now we do the definitions, and we merge in that Excel file. Here's the feature definitions. And so those XML files are now up to date. And so if we go back into here, what we've done is modified or updated these two files where they're now in sync with the Excel spreadsheets. So to bring these back in to the DGNlib, if we were to just import them directly, it would give them a numeric suffix of number 1 because those things already exist, and we don't want to do that. So this file, essentially, when we go to do this bulk import again, you need to start with a clean file each time. And so I'm going to delete our ORD features file. We'll delete it, and then we're going to grab a new seed file and rename it. So this file, this ordfeatures.dgnlib, is a brand new 3D file coming from Connect, seed file. And so let's go ahead and open that back up. Again, I'm not going to be in a workspace or work set, but I do want to make sure that, again, I have access to those custom line styles through a resource file or some type of MS resource config file, that you can bring those in and have access, because when you do import those levels, it is going to be looking for those custom line styles. So with this file open, we're going to go back to import our levels. Then we're going to import our element templates. And again, if you want to sort those, that's fine. Then this order is important because the feature definitions point to the symbologies. You want to import the symbologies first. So we'll import the symbologies. And this does sometimes have a refresh issue with Project Explorer. So if you don't see everything filled out, then you can try to do a refresh, or you can simply go up and compress the file. And then when you expand down, you should see everything that's brought in. And just to show you, we created all of these surface symbologies. And so they're all there now. And you can see now they point to the element templates. And then lastly, we want to import the feature definitions. Give that just a minute to process. And again, we would see, for example, if we come down and look at our payment, proposed, concrete payment for an example, it points to the proper linear feature symbology and the profile symbology. And then down here, we have linear, pavement, proposed, concrete, and that points to the appropriate element template. And so to test our work, all we have to do is open up our template editor. I'm not in a workspace, so there's no variable set for this. But if I go to open up the default ITL that I brought over from the SS2 world just to test, and we'll expand down and look at this template, I have all of my colors. I have my point names. And so, for example, if I come in here and I look at it, you'll see that I have the full path to the feature definition. Everything shows up correctly. If I look at a component, you'll see that it's pointing to the mesh, pavement, proposed, asphalt. And so that looks good. And you'll see that they're all there, just like they were in the DDB all the way back in SS2. Now, one thing is when you go to open this template library for the first time and connect, it will try to burn in these paths. And so if you're going to continue to manipulate these paths, I would not save this template library right now. So when it asks you to close it, you can just say no, or if you're done and you like the paths, that's fine. You can save it. Just one last piece of advice on this. Now that everything's plugged in and it's working in terms of the linears and the mesh, which is really what controls our corridor 3D modeling, you still have alignments, trains, corridors, super, linears, surface, points, and even your SU information. All of this is covered. Every bit of this is covered in the Learn path for SS4 to OpenRoads Designer Workspace migration. This is just a supplemental video that talks about how do I get in an OpenRoads environment world where I don't have element templates or I don't have anything in SELECTseries 4. Everything's all the way back in SELECTseries 2. This supplemental video will at least get you up and running with your levels and your element templates and your features and their symbologies. And so hopefully you find this to be of use. And then I would suggest after you get this done to go back through the main video library series that goes through all of these different categories. And lastly, now that you've done the bulk editing, at any time you can go back and export the symbologies, the definitions to XMLs, use the utility to convert those to Excel, and you can manipulate paths, you can delete things, add things, move things around. The only thing that I would caution is in your element templates, if you start moving things, renaming folders, those types of things, that will break your linkage between your element templates and your symbologies. And so the way that I normally do those types of bulk changes is I do everything in Excel. And so I will have my definitions, my symbologies, and my element template spreadsheet, all three spreadsheets opened at the same time. And so if I make a change to the element template, I have to make that change then to the symbology spreadsheet. And then if I make changes in the symbology spreadsheet, for example, I change a path or a name, I have to go to the definition spreadsheet and make the same change. And so you're dealing with element templates, symbologies, and definitions in those spreadsheets. But for bulk changes, it's a lot easier to do it in Excel and then remake the XMLs and import them than it is to try to do them one at a time inside this DGN library. So hopefully you will find this helpful, and I just encourage you to stay focused, and I'm sure you will do great. Thank you.